Alright, welcome back everyone. And so I'm going to focus on Sukhothai and maybe break it into several parts. I have not worked directly in Thailand, but I've actually worked in the Thai-Cambodia border on the Cambodian side. I've had 3 seasons, and so I have picked up some knowledge that I might be able to bring to it. So the importance of Sukhothai and the Sukhothai kingdom is that it's very much a symbol of Thai history and national identity in many ways. And it was originally a Khmer outpost, but later became the capital of what's known as the Thai kingdom. So the Khmer Empire was an empire that extended through much of Southeast Asia into parts of Thailand, and it originated it's centered around Angkor in Cambodia. But during the around 1200s, local inhabitants of Sukhothai revolted or rebelled against the Khmer influence and founded their own kingdom here at Sukhothai. And it's often thought to be the first quote-unquote Thai kingdom. That's not correct technically, but it remains symbolically a very major watershed moment, especially in this idea of resisting and overthrowing Khmer control. And there are lots of stories about the first founding king of Sukhothai, the King Phra Ruang. And I'll talk a little bit more about his mythology as well, because it is mentioned in the game. There are a bunch of different really interesting things that are mentioned in the game that I'll elaborate on. But I think important thing to point out about the map of Sukhothai, the landscape, is that it's very much not as in real life. It's not as flooded as we see in the game. By using this kind of rainy season rationale, they really did allow for themselves to try to give a more unique sense of navigation throughout the space. Right, boats like that are used in Thailand, in the region, yes, that's true, just not necessarily in such close proximity to the historical park. But by doing so, I think you give a certain element to traversal that's different from, let's say, Giza or the Vatican, which is mainly on foot. At the same time, how effectively that ended up being a feature that players enjoyed is another question, because I think a lot of people were frustrated about the navigation of using the boat. But there's also a greater level of exploration, and unfortunately, if this area wasn't also especially bugged, then it'd be okay. But yeah, in terms of the map itself, overall the main temples are there. So you have Wat Mahatat, you have the Wat Sa Si, Wat Si Sawai. Those are all in the right locations. And let's see, the main differences are the location of Tongdong's hut, the village itself, the jungle bruiser pit obviously, and the hidden pyramid. So also Wat Chana Songkhram is in the right location. The hidden pyramid and the other elements relating to Voss's camp and the village, those are slightly inaccurate. The explosion site as well, the treehouse also. Those are a little bit inaccurate, but in weird ways, because they're still actually trying to keep to real life components of these sites. They just made slight modifications to it. So believe it or not, that hidden pyramid area, there's actually something there in real life. So here's a more tourist-friendly map. I thought maybe it'd be good to use one of these guide maps instead of trying to use a technical map, because that might be a little bit dry, and it might also be very helpful to visualize. One of the more kind of, I know, frustrating things about reading academic literature, technical literature, and archaeology is that we can struggle with drawing didactic or maps that you can teach with and read to understand, as opposed, we tend to use a lot of just, here's an accurate scaled representation of it to let you know what these specific features are, and that cannot always be good in every context, of course. But yeah, so you have, what's interesting with this map I found is that all the starred locations are the main temples in the game, right? So when they developed it, they might have been looking at a guidebook or a map like this, and they just pinpointed the specific main temples of the site. So you can see at the bottom Wat Si Sawai, you can see again Wat Chana Songkhram and Wat Sa Si, and so yeah, those are right there. What's not shown, sorry, and if you look up in the northern corner of this square enclosure, you actually see a gate, right, much like the gate in the game, except not with gears, of course. And in the back you do have another temple that is replaced by the hidden temple in the game. Now there's a 6th star in the back behind where the hidden temple area is. That one isn't shown, though it has arguably one of the most beautiful statues of a Buddha, I think, at the site that still is there. There's actually a gold Buddha statue that was at this site and is referenced briefly in the game that was moved, I believe, to Bangkok instead. So yeah, so the actual hidden pyramid is what's known as Wat Phra Luang, or the temple, aka the Temple of the Wind, which is very surprisingly, I think, thematically relevant, right? They probably saw that it was called Temple of the Wind and decided to create this hidden pyramid with this space that has a lot of rushing wind in it as a component of its design. It doesn't look like it. It's very different in design, but it's pretty cool that they have that there. As for the village itself, that is actually, if we were to look at it in scale, is where a 7-Eleven is, and where sort of some welcome buildings and the site of the National Museum is. So that covers the village, Tongdong store, treehouse, and the Jungle Bruiser pit. And I think in particular the Jungle Bruiser pit is where the 7-Eleven is, more or less. But yeah, and the National Museum is roughly where the village itself is, which is kind of fun because that is I think in the game, when you're having a bunch of folks who are kind of representing the Thai people, it's cool to have it in the location where the National Museum would be. But I did try to look for the actual village itself. Didn't find any leads in terms of finding an actual village of the same name. But so I tried to look up the name, the Kaimuk Saksit. Sorry for the pronunciation, anybody who is Thai out there. I tried to look up the name of the village, and it actually does mean sacred holy pearl, or blessed pearl, which is one of the things, which is what we're trying to find in the game, and is the name of one of the main quests. So it's not, I don't think it's a real village or town in the vicinity of Sukhothai itself in real life, but it's sort of this fictional village in universe that's meant to kind of reflect how important this object was, that ancestrally it would be, the town would be named, the village would be named after it. And also the classic, the treasure was with us all along, they are the blessed pearl. And that's, if we base it off of the in-game map, and if we were to put it within scale, that is where the village would be, in this kind of welcome area, 7-Eleven area. But if we expand into kind of real life, the closest major settlement area would be the town of Tani, which is sometimes nicknamed New Sukhothai. So I think in real life, yes, it would actually, there's a place to the east of the historical park, but it's just a different name, and it's much bigger. It'd be interesting to know what it looked like in 1937, but unfortunately I have not been able to find records within my means of what it would have looked like back in the 30s. Let's try to do a Sukhothai tour of several of the major temples, and the reason why we're starting at Wat Mahatat is because it is arguably one of the central, if not one of the most, also the most complex and ornate temples in the middle of the city of Sukhothai. And the reason why we're starting here in Wat Mahatat East is because that is how some of these temples are oriented. They're oriented eastward, east-facing, with moats and walls encircling them, and you'd enter from the east into what here we would call an assembly. Sorry, no, yeah, a room. Sorry, an assembly hall. Now, that said, the area that we're dropped off at on the docks, it has a little bit more water than it really would in Sukhothai. The game itself does give the rationale that it's more or less flooded because of the rain season being incredibly heavy, so it gives an excuse for why you're using the boat to go through. But the site itself is actually walkable by and large. There are now, of course, artificial water bodies, moats, and reservoirs that are a major feature of these temples here in Southeast Asia, which we'll encounter. A lot of irrigation technology was necessary in order to make these moats and these reservoirs, and I'll show you a little bit more of that. And the game does emphasize that as a rationale for some of its traps and designs. In real life, it wasn't that complex, but it is an element that is reflected on in the game. Okay, so as we walk through here, this is what's known as a tall assembly hall. So this is a later addition and expansion, and these assembly halls would be there for the majority of visitors. So if you're just visiting, you're not a monk, you're just visiting, you would go into this hall and you'd see this Buddha statue. And a major feature of a lot of these assembly halls at Sukhothai is that they have pillared constructions. So you can see the roof no longer exists. It would have been made of more perishable materials. But a lot of the pillars you can see are still survive in a ruined state, albeit. And looking at the Buddha here, Buddhas do have specific iconography in terms of the way that these figures are posed, refer to different stories. This one, if you look at the hand gestures in the face, that's known as Buddha in the gesture of subduing Mara. So one of the instances in the Buddha's life where he kind of defeats an opponent. I'm not sure if it's the same exact Buddha, but I did find one that was similar in the book that I've been looking through to do research for this video. Might be the same. It's a different condition than this one. I do believe that they are reusing the same Buddha statue here in the model for the game a few times, so that might be why. So they are trying to be very accurate, but they are reusing some of the assets there rather than trying to model the individual Buddha sometimes. Okay, so moving on, let's see, go around the tall assembly hall and into the main assembly hall. Or the original assembly hall, rather. Again, you can see the columns, but you can also see how much larger this space is. The number of columns, the relative grandeur of this space would have been big enough to carry the majority of the people who are here to pray, here to hear sermons for monks. And you can see a little bit of the kind of the spatial logic of this space. You can see over here the back of the Buddha's head from the tall assembly hall, and then if you turn around, you see one of the major Buddhas in alignment facing towards us, facing towards the tall assembly hall as well. So they're all kind of lined up here. And what's in front of us is what's known as the central group. And the center here, this giant, tall structure, is what's known as the Lotus Bud Stupa. And it seems to be the original component of this temple complex, it seems. And then its later components, like this assembly hall and the tall assembly hall, were added afterwards. And the game itself, of course, you can see that this is where you'd go down into the hidden depths of Sukhothai to discover the kind of the final stone before you have to run off. And unfortunately, this Buddha here has had its head cut off. Major reason why you see mainly heads in a lot of museums in North America and Europe of Buddhas, or even some private collections, is because of the kind of looting, the trophy taking from the sites. The selling of antiquities has long been a thing since at least the 19th century and likely earlier. And so that was one of the tactics. This is the other half of what you might have seen elsewhere in museums. This is the remnant of the body itself, because the people taking them, the looters, rich collectors, were unable to take the entire statue. They would just lop off the tops. And you can see here's another Buddha in better shape. However, most interestingly is actually on the west side here. So again, we were starting on the east side, so we're facing west, and then in the north side. So right about here. Well, there's actually a lotus-shaped pedestal up here that had the largest bronze statue found at Sukhothai, and I believe maybe even Thailand, actually. So let's see if we can climb up there. Okay, so no staircase here, but I managed to climb up. And yeah, this is what the lotus-shaped pedestal that a large bronze Buddha statue would have stood. You can see the way it's constructed. It's in the shape of a lotus bud. It's like a lotus bud. It is somewhat kind of angular in the way it's constructed, of course. And it would have been quite a formidable sight. Imagine a bronze giant statue of a Buddha as you enter this kind of temple space, especially in that time period, in the 12th century, 13th century, or 14th century. And it looks like it's constructed of brick. So we have brick here, but we also have, on the other hand, we have laterite. So these are two major construction materials found in this region, in Thailand and Cambodia. And well, brick is pretty straightforward. It's brick, clay bricks. But the laterite it's actually a type of stone that initially, when you find it, it's soft, it's malleable, that you can cut it. But once it dries, it gets incredibly hard. So it is a favorite construction method for some temples here in the region because of that. And that's partly why how they were able to make such large structures. And this is also why temples in the region are what survive, right? A lot of other constructions, even the palaces at Sukhothai, at Angkor in Cambodia, the palaces were made of perishable materials in many cases, majority of it. So often we find temples in the region as opposed to houses or palaces or things like that. Though more recent technologies, LiDAR technology in particular, from the air, has been able to help us identify kind of voids or differences in the landscape, and show us where plots, house mounds and other former structures might have been. And so, for reference, laterite looks very, very porous in comparison to the brick, of course, and they have these large chunks. And you can see here how it's a little bit. The brick in comparison is a lot more. It's smaller. It's also more uniform in many ways, whereas the laterite has a certain degree of unevenness to its corners too, especially after being worn down for so long. The carved stone is also another component, but we're not seeing it right now. Yes, and so going back to the lotus-shaped the lotus-shaped platform. Yeah, this was the location of the largest bronze statue in Thailand, and it still exists. It's just been relocated to Bangkok instead, to another location. And you can see a few more Buddha statues here on the side. Some of these might not be entirely accurate, simply either because of the reuse of assets for the game, rather than trying to model every individual one, but also because some of these might be statues that weren't restored until the 1950s. But they did do a pretty great job trying to reconstruct the site, the developers, that is, with as much vegetation as possible. Some of the temples in kind of outer regions that aren't tourist areas, they can get very overgrown like this. And I've had the experience of working in the Thai-Cambodia border, and yeah, some of those sites are a little bit difficult to walk around and climb in. The game does a pretty good job with it, though in real life it's even more uneven. The ground is, and you have a lot of bugs all around you, sometimes ants falling into your shirt from above and biting you inside, and a variety of other things, mosquitoes too, and the threat of malaria or dengue. So, stepping back, you have two staircases leading up to the central group. And looking at the central group itself, it isn't super clear from this angle, but you can see here are these stupas with the more pointy ends, somewhat more narrow. And you also have these prangs that are located roughly in each cardinal direction. So, let's see if we can get to a higher location and get a better look at this. And you can see a lot of this stonefall, and that's pretty accurate in many ways. Sometimes you will find temples with this kind of stonefall, often from higher towers in particular, and it can be pretty hard to climb because sediments and vegetation do grow over them, but they're still making them very hard to see as you walk through it. And again, it's a very good attention to detail. This is not, though, and perhaps I spoke a little too soon. The textures you can see are a little bit wacky. It's just sort of a brick wall texture that's placed inside this broken section, and you can see it really doesn't match at all. Now you have the laterite here, and then you just have the brick texture smeared in between. The rest of it all around it, the more kind of muddy dirt textures, they work fine, and probably they didn't really need to add that one, but it is what it is. It's not exactly right, but not the most important detail. So let's see if we can climb to a better location to take a look at the central group. Okay, so just climbing up to the area behind this Buddha of the original assembly hall, you have a better idea as to what the layout is in terms of how the tall assembly hall, the original assembly hall, relates to these Buddhas, and also the central lotus-shaped stupa behind me. So in the design of it, there's a specific kind of intention behind what the visitor sees. You see the Buddhas lined up against the kind of central stupa, which again is in some ways supposed to be a mandala. It's supposed to be a cosmogram of the universe in some ways. So at the center you have a representation of Mount Meru, the sacred mountain of Hindu religion, and then you have that sort of almost a little bit, modified, adjusted to emphasize the Buddha. Both staircases flanking the Buddha at the back of the original assembly hall would lead up to the stupa itself. And as you walk in the original assembly hall, you see that giant bronze Buddha statue as well. So again, there are stupas around each corner of this. So you can think of it as like a square. All of the corners have stupas, and in between every corner, so all the flat sides, you have 4 prang. And prangs are derived from the Khmer prasat concept, which is a larger tower, and we'll see some of them when we go to Wat Si Sawai. And you can see here again the careful attention to detail. You can see the laterite blocks right in front of me, as well as the stucco in contrast on the lotus bud stupa itself. So some of these spaces were in fact stuccoed over on top of the brick. Here you can see the contrast between the more pointed prangs and the wider, chunkier prangs in contrast to the thinner stupas. And again, the prang being kind of influenced by the larger tower architecture that you could actually walk into. In this case, it's become sort of more symbolic to the point where there's nothing that you can walk into. Though this does allow it to be easier to construct at a higher level. You don't have any actual room within that you have to be aware of when you're building, and that to prevent it from collapsing. And here's a better close-up of what the stupas look like in comparison. And you can also see this lotus-shaped base here. It's a little jagged, and it's designed because of the brickwork. But it's fundamentally a very different shape, even though it's broadly similar. It's a little taller, it's a little thinner, the arches are a little bit tighter together, And whereas here are the slightly more Khmer style prangs that you can see is a little bit wider, a little bit chunkier, and also built differently in terms of the building. If you look at the building materials, the prangs have more laterite construction, whereas the stupas have a lot more brickwork to them. In terms of the main lotus bud stupa, and well, just like real life, though, I suppose if it was Assassin's Creed or something, we'd be able to climb up there. And yeah, here there's actually a little camp. That's a fun little addition to the environment. I do like that there's a bit of world building. And it's not really clear. I think they don't directly associate with Aran, but there are a few locations with backpacks and pillows and food and things like that. And of course, it would be kind of awkward if Aran had like 5 backpacks. But the Thai archaeologist that we meet who has the treehouse, but we also find at Wat Sa Sawai that gets stuck underneath the supposed fictional Khmer warrior temple space. And yeah, but I believe it's roughly the same. It should be him if we're following in his foot tracks, even if it's not explicitly said so. And there's a little note that refers back to describing the Arans, or the mysterious scholars, revisiting these spaces and invoking an account about Sukhothai from the past by a certain prince, and that prince would be King Vajiravudh, who was at the time a prince when he wrote an important description of Sukhothai when he visited there. And he was highly invested in the culture and arts in Thailand, very Thai nationalism as well. And he actually translated a bunch of, aside from doing archaeology, he also translated Agatha Christie novels, and among many other different pieces of literature from around the world into Thai. And it's pretty fun, to have this idea of kind of people visiting these spaces and camping out. And it's interesting that they even had like sliced bread here, which is I don't know what it is. Is that a mandolin? A few more views of the stupas and the prangs themselves, and you can see the arches are modeled off of actual entrances if they were towers. But again, much more kind of ornamentalized versions of architecture. So they're almost like it is a piece of architecture, but it's a miniaturization of another form of architecture. Despite being so tall, just doing that to make it. This does again allow it to be a much taller structure, without having all the complicated risks of building a tower that could collapse. On the inside, if you're inside it. See a little bit more of the way it's constructed in detail here. Again, these aren't the old kind of brushed on textures that you see in older Indiana Jones games or Tomb Raider games. They're very much replicating how the different blocks of different materials, sandstone, carved sandstone, brick, laterite, how they all interconnect together. And it's a pretty good representation of it, except I think what it might be lacking are some of the more intricate designs that are featured. So the prangs should have more decorative arches with what are known as kala faces, so this kind of monster's mouth over some sections of it, and also the life of the Buddha is represented among the different prangs here, from his birth all the way to his ascension. So it would have taken a lot more time. The game would have been the game size would have been much bigger if they did do that. So yeah, it's still far better than a lot of what we've had in the past, and rivals what we would see in Assassin's Creed Origins or Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where they really tried to be very faithful to the original archaeological sites the historical sites that they come from, that they're modeling off of. But other than that, not much else I have to say for now about the Central Group. And let's move on to two other features that flank the Central Group. They're known as mandapas or mandaps, and they're these large rectangular structures that house extremely tall Buddhas, really large Buddhas, that are quite a view. If you've gone through these spaces, you might have come across it. And they're actually in a pair next to the Central Group on the north end and on the south end. And apologies for the mess here. We're at the southern Mandapa, and there was a bit of there's some trash that needed to be taken care of. So let's get back to focusing on looking at the architecture itself. And so if you look above, you can see some of the stucco that would have covered the structure again, and you can see a more laterite base with brick on top. Of course, the laterite to create a good strong foundation, the brick being lighter and easier to build up. And yeah, so here you can see the main opening of the Mandapa, the absolutely amazing and massive Buddha that stands within. And in real life, it actually goes a little bit, there's a bit of a step up to reach the Mandapa and the Buddha, so it's still kind of covered up here in the game, which is a pretty cool, neat little way of showing how it's been excavated, even though there's a lot of fall damage, and possibly also based off of what we've seen from Voss's men kind of just hammering into the empty space on the ground. They're also theoretically damaging sections of this Mandapa. You can see there's a lot more laterite fall and things like that than there should be. And as from an archaeologist's perspective, technically yes, it could have slid in because of all the flooding, and that can move the dirt and the soil to kind of wash up against, or erode and slide against some of these structures. And that does happen, which can make it very frustrating interpretively, but also in terms of excavation, because you have to move those blocks out of the way. And that's something that I have had to do. Kind of moving laterite blocks can be hard, very, very difficult. Yeah, but again, looking at the sheer amount of laterite, again, the upper part is made of brick, so it is perhaps a degree of inaccuracy and a bit of a gaffe to throw a bunch of laterite blocks inside the Mandapa like this. But I guess it's more dramatic or easier than having to model a bunch of smaller bricks as brickfall in this space. And you can tell, as an archaeologist, a little bit more about their excavation methodology, which in many ways isn't great. It's more targeted around trying to excavate the structure, tunneling around it, and it's not a very kind of square unit. It's kind of a rounded space in the back, and that's the reason why we excavate in square units is because it's more organized, right? If you have one square, you can place squares next to each face of the square in order to get the complete area, right? Year by year, maybe you can only excavate a few sections of the site, you put squares in different locations, and then if you wanted to follow up, or anybody else wanted to follow up, you could kind of pinpoint roughly where the side of another unit is and expand on that. So it's much more organized. It also allows us to locate finds unit by unit, so almost like Battleship, where you have a kind of gridded XY coordinates for the locations of different finds as well. So that said, tunneling and kind of more targeted excavations of this sort is somewhat representative of the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century. In fact, sometimes it could be worse. So in some cases they would just roughly tunnel around structures. So a lot of places in Mesopotamia, earlier excavations of Nineveh, Nimrud, for example. Also, that the game developers did try to add a bit of logic to how it was excavated in the use of retainer walls to keep the dirt from falling into the unit. That's not really something that we always get to do because we don't necessarily have the resources to build walls for everything, and it may not be necessary, though it's certainly useful, certainly helpful, especially if you have more resources and you have longer period excavations. Right, so usually if it's a shorter term excavation, the sides of the unit will mostly hold, especially in this area. You can also see there's a ramp here where it goes down. That's how they would take the dirt out, right? You need a ramp for all those wheelbarrows. But though I think they kind of made it a little bit too steppy here. In that situation, you'd have to bucket it out, right? You can't run what do you call it, a wheelbarrow up a step, of course. So there's a lot more to be said about this South Mandapa, as well as looking for some of the other structures to see how far they're actually going to in replicating this space. But let's look at the northern Mandapa. So again, on opposite sides of the central group, there's this South Mandapa. There should be another one on the other side. So let's see if they've actually modeled that, or whether they've just moved that out. Okay, so we're going to go walk around this area all the way to the back of the central group. So this is the western end of the central group. And it looks like there's a lot of vegetation. I don't know if we can actually go here. I actually have a note that's a glitched note here where I'm supposed to pick up a book or something here. So something I'll have to do when they finally fix all the glitches, I'll get to 100% this game. Okay, so let's see. Okay, yep, it's there. Let's see if we can get up to it. Nope, so it doesn't seem like we can get up to it, but you can see that they really modeled it in all its glory. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful in the foliage here, and yeah, I mean, I wonder why they cut that part off. I guess just to control the amount of space that they have to render, or they didn't render the extended kind of grassy area on the opposite side of Mandapa. And see, and maybe some of the other structures too. Okay, awesome. So I guess I don't think we can go any further on the north end of this site. So let's go back to the South Mandapa. I have a few more things to say, and I think there are a few more things you might want to check out over there. So, about the South Mandapa, which actually, now that I compare it, comparing it from the North Mandapa, it does seem like it's... They clearly elevated the space to create this kind of... to make it seem shorter on the surface, this Mandapa, and give you the ability to walk down it, I guess. But yeah, the other one looked far more at a higher elevation, but that's just because of the uneven terrain. But aside from that, the South Mandapa does have a sort of mythical story associated with it, and supposedly in the past there was a giant boulder in front of this Mandapa, and that was supposedly where the Phra Ruang, so the first king of the Sukhothai kingdom, the founder, and all subsequent kings would also be known as Phra Ruangs. But yeah, against the Khmer who were in control of this area, right? The oldest parts of some of the architecture at Sukhothai that we know of, the temple architecture, is Khmer, because this was a Khmer outpost. So the Angkor, the Khmer Empire, reached all the way into this region of Thailand, and the Phra Ruang, revolting against, or fighting against, pushing back the Khmer, supposedly actually turned one Khmer warrior into a stone boulder. So, and unfortunately, it's no idea where it is now, but that's the story, and that's how it goes supposedly. Now it seems on the south side here, this Mandapa is essentially about as far as the developers have created or recreated the Wat Mahatat. There should be more assembly halls, a few more stupas, a few unique stupas too, and a few more structures on the east side. But as you can see, it's either just this large mass of earth, or it's underwater in the game. So farm would not be submerged to that extent, so that part's not so realistic. Okay, so since we can't go further south either, let's go back west to the back of the central group. And you can see here that there's something going on back here. There's a bunch of pillars, and that goes in towards this tented area that it seems they've set up shop, a field lab for. As you can see, right, based off of what you've already seen before, right, the colonnaded structures usually lead to some big monument ahead of it, and theoretically there is supposed to be another, well, in real life rather, not theoretically, in real life there is another large stupa structure that's in front of this columned open space, which isn't modeled. Again, they block off the back of it with this kind of giant, I guess you could say elevated area of dirt and sediment. So yeah, so unfortunately that isn't modeled either. So that's essentially what they've done, is basically cut out a section of Wat Mahatat and then sink it into the ground and then elevate the sides of it to create boundaries, basically. Okay, so wow, they even have a big giant excavator here. That generally would not be considered good practice, though it is sometimes used in certain cases archaeologically by some teams to remove very large amounts of sediment or kind of remnants of materials not anthropogenic. Sorry, so not made by humans. So let's say an area is abandoned for a very long time. A lot of the sedimentation, from floods or the post-depositional processes, so what happens after the site is abandoned, all the foliage going onto the ground, things decaying, creates a large numbers of layers that have no specific cultural or at least archaeological importance. So in those cases, some archaeologists do try to peel that layer off using machinery, though that has to be done very carefully, or else one absolutely destroys culturally significant remnants of some of this architecture too. And I think in Voss's case, clearly they're not doing a good job there. They're not trying to really protect anything or preserve anything. So I'm just taking a look at this screen. It's a very sturdy looking screen in my experience, I would say. Also looks like it'd be kind of heavy to use. You can see that there are handles on the sides. There are little handles on the sides for holding and screening, but there's also handles for there are metal handles as well on the opposite, the long ends of the sides as well. And there's nothing to attach it to, so sometimes we can screen it just above the air using our arms. So when I'm working in Peru, we don't really have the means by which to set up a stand or something, or use really heavy screens, so we actually have to just lift the entire screen itself. And we sometimes use smaller screens for this because of this purpose. Lift it into the air and we shake it like that. So but other teams, they sometimes, and other teams I've been a part of, they have either these fancy folding screens, or they hang it up on a tree, or they, to make it easier for them. It's like screening or sifting flour, essentially. Right? You're looking for, let's see if you can find artifacts, or you can find ecofacts. If you can find things like charcoal, that could be useful for dating, but you have to be very careful not to contaminate it. You could also find kind of shell and animal bones, things like that. And yeah, working in the jungle, working in forested areas, to use Canada as an example, it can be very, very hard compared to working in the desert. One of the reasons why I love working in the desert is because it's mostly sand in jungle areas and forested areas. It could get very clumpy because of roots, and also it can be very and sometimes you can't you don't want to damage the trees either, so you have to cut around, but you still get very clumpy clay, or you get just unfortunately if it's rained before, or if it's a wet area, you just get clumps of mud, which can be very, very terrible to screen through. So one more thing I forgot to mention when I was at the back here, on the west side, is that you see this kind of lotus-shaped pedestal, and on top you can actually see this little square hole with a lot of dirt in it, this square depression. That's actually for inserting, for placing statues, or in some cases stela as well. So that would be where you put the fill in, and you would insert it to secure it. So we've seen the assembly hall, we've seen some of the stupas, we've seen the mandapas. Aside from the assembly halls, there also should be an ordination hall. So again, the assembly hall would be where the public would visit. So any visitors, they would go to the larger assembly hall in order to hear sermons and to engage and to talk with the monks, or to give their prayers. But the ordination hall is the separate building specifically for monks and for their ceremonies, for their rituals. So it's a much more private ritual space. And I know we couldn't go through eastwards when I was by go northwards by the North Mandapa, but there is this bridge here that goes to Wat Chana Songkhram, and let's see if we can find it on the other side. See if they at least modeled it. And unfortunately, okay, it looks like they didn't model it. It is just in the water, or it's not even there. Theoretically, where this water is should be where the ordination hall for the monks should be. So overall, Wat Mahatat is pretty accurate. Let's move on to the next temple just north of Wat Mahatat, which is Wat Chana Songkhram, and this area is a little bit. It's much smaller than Wat Mahatat, as you'll see. It's much more like a condensed version of what we saw, but also it fundamentally looks a little different too. So at the including the placement of the ordination halls. So we're walking here. We're actually walking from the back side. So the west side. This is you have this large open area with columns. That is the actual ordination hall. And you have a bunch of smaller stupas all around that are all bell-shaped. So this temple, and a few of the other temples too, are known for having more bell-shaped stupas, and especially this one with the large central, really pointed tip bell-shaped stupa that is an influence from Sri Lanka. So a lot of aspects of Sukhothai actually also owes its origins from an influence from Sri Lanka. So not just India, but also Sri Lanka, and that's also relevant, at least for Indiana Jones too, because Sri Lanka was featured in Emperor's Tomb in the the opening of the first level. That technically takes place in Sri Lanka, though at the time it would be called Ceylon. And yeah, interestingly, the architecture for that game, and I'll cover that game too, but it really does lack a lot of things that are actually Sri Lankan, I believe. Okay, here's another view of the ordination hall, a little bit elevated position so you can see the rough layout. It's similar to the assembly halls. And at the front we have the assembly hall as well, which is feels a little bit smaller, and we can see some of the pedestals too. for statues. And that's really about it for Wat Chana Songkhram. It was originally built around the 14th century, and Wat Chana Songkhram means Temple of Victory. It's relatively restrained compared to Wat Mahatat's much more complex architecture. And wandering around just this area, a lot of it is... the rest of it seems to just be Voss's camp and kind of things planted on top of it that aren't quite the same. At least one of these outbuildings around this area is actually a repeated architectural building that they reused an asset for. So let's move on to Wat Si Sawai next. Where we get off the boat doesn't really seem to be an actual part of Wat Si Sawai, or at least it's not very clearly so. It just looks like a lot of kind of set dressing for Voss's camp, and you have at least one kind of small tent that probably wouldn't fit all the team members that you see, and some equipment that's scattered around here. The guitar as well. It seems like Voss's men really love the guitar, but we kind of have to walk all the way to the end of this space in order to get to the entrance, and that's really mainly to, I think, create that sense of exploration, and also kind of make it more mysterious to have to walk underneath the vines and the overgrowth between two seated Buddhas here. And then when we go through it, we see the three large distinctive towers. And what's interesting, if you look at the map for comparison here, we're actually facing north, so we're on the south side of these structures. So whereas Wat Chana Songkhram and Wat Mahatat have like an east-west axis, so the entrances or the direction of the Buddhas, for example, they face eastwards, right? Whereas this temple, all the entrances, and these are actual towers, so they can sometimes be called prangs, but they're in many ways more accurately called prasats, based off of what the Khmer called them, because these are Khmer-style prasats. These are much older than... These predate the Sukhothai kingdom and date back to the time when Sukhothai was a Khmer outpost. And so, unlike the prangs that we saw at Wat Mahatat, these ones you can actually walk into. They're actual tower structures. They're not like deep. They don't have the secret, rooms or the tunnels going down like we see at Wat Sa Si in this fictionalized version. But it is much bigger, and they're much chunkier, as you can see. And Indy calls them compares them to three corn cobs. But the temple Wat Si Sawai actually means temple of the mangoes. So I guess that's an alternate way to think about it. So let's go see if we can get a better vantage point over on the side here. Okay, so again, we have another one of these Buddha statues. I don't know if this one's actually accurate to the site itself, or if it's just kind of placed there. Can't really see that based off of the maps I have and the photos that I have, but it does seem to be kind of a reuse of some of the same Buddha statues that we saw earlier at Wat Mahatat. They seem to be reusing assets in the game. There are a lot of similar looking Buddhas, but it does seem like they were trying to save on time rather than try to model or recreate each individual Buddha statue. Okay, and here we have a better view of the Wat Sa Sawai's three main prangs or prasats. And there are some... the use of the prasat can be a little bit complicated in Thailand. There are other things called prasats as well, but they're all derived from older Sanskrit names for things, and they kind of get reused and remixed in for lack of a better term right now, in Cambodian and in Thailand as well. So, but yeah, these prangs or these towers, maybe might be said, they face southwards, and you can see out front you have these columns and this room area. So yeah, the assembly hall, this one is actually, these are all late additions. The original component of the site, the Khmer component, are the three main towers. Everything around it are additional assembly halls, multiple different assembly halls that were added in order to accommodate more visitors to this area during the Sukhothai period. So it dates to around the 12th to 13th century, so in other words, around the 1100s to 1200s, so that predates Wat Mahatat's main stupa, which is around late 1200s to the 1300s, so which would be 13th, 14th century. So the Sukhothai period, the apex of that is sometimes said to be around the 14th century. So this is much earlier. Another major component of understanding these Wat Si Sawai, and arguably a good chunk of this site, is also that the earlier Khmer components would have been more Hindu, so more worship of Vishnu or Shiva or Brahma as opposed to the Buddha. And so, and this is something that you see also in Angkor and in the Khmer world as well. So you have Theravada Buddhism, or Mahayana Buddhism in Angkor for a while, but ultimately what's known as Theravada Buddhism taking over in Thailand, and also taking over during the Sukhothai period afterwards. So a lot of older Hindu temples were basically reconsecrated, or basically kind of re-signified as kind of these Buddhist worshipping spaces instead. And so that's why we see a mix of it. And interestingly, Wat Sa Sawai does play with this idea, because you have these Buddha upstairs here, but then they add like a Shiva statue in the secret underground tunnels. Yeah, a fictionalized version. And we'll go and take a look at that as well. Okay, so let's stroll back down here. I think I'll have to change back into my disguise to avoid getting into another fight like I did at Wat Mahatat. So, okay. Oh, well, I guess there's still captains around to take a look. So yeah, let's dodge around this guy for a bit and look at some of these people digging. And again, they are kind of digging into nothingness, which can be a bit of an issue, I guess, if you want total accuracy. But it's a lot better than a lot of things we've seen in the past. And it's games, archaeology-based games, right? It is actually very much trying to represent an actual archaeological excavation, which is amazing. That's something we've seen increase over time in Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider, if you've seen some of my other videos. And yeah, so a much more condensed version here. Okay, so let's try to get to the main, get to the assembly halls. Okay, so entering into this open area, well, this enclosed area, there's actually supposed to be two assembly halls adjacent to one another. We can't really go into this one side, they've blocked it off here, and here we only see it kind of to a limited extent. And then there's another ancillary building to the side here that's also accurate. So they really trying to control how much that they need to, need to be rendered and for us to be able to walk around in. So unfortunately we can't really go into the other towers except for the central one, and that one is kind of a somewhat fictionalized version, but let's go take a look. And so if you're wondering how they made these towers at the top here, so they're actually kind of using corbelled architecture. So, think about how, if you're familiar with the Mayan world, for example, you might have heard of corbelled arches, right? Where you, I guess even also for around the world too. They're basically, think about, stacking bricks closer and closer together until you create kind of almost a pyramidal outline, right, around an area. That way you create, I should imagine that done in all dimensions to create the tower structure, and that's in a circle. So that's how it's constructed. Very amazing marvel of engineering in many ways, particularly in its period too. And actually, before we go in, if we look at the back here behind the three towers, there's this water area. That actually, this time it's roughly correct, because there are moats behind these towers in real life. Okay, so let's go into the central tower itself, and it's actually, there's a bit of a logic to how they're doing this. So if you go into the main Prang or Prasat, you see that there's this very kind of small circular area, and that's, in real life, that is what it would be, right? A lot of these towers, they're built very tall, very high. What makes them impressive is that main thing. It's not that they have a big space inside them, but rather that they emphasize height over kind of width. And yeah, in these towers, depending on the time period, depending on the religious association, whether it's Hinduism, whether it's Buddhism, you could have any number of different types of things. You could have statues of deities. It could be Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. It could be Buddha. It could also be a linga, so a round-shaped stone, representing also one or all three of those deities I mentioned, Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, which are known together as the Trimurti. So they're the kind of aspects of supreme divinity. And they would be placed on a pedestal known as a yoni, so which represents more kind of female power in a sense, and you'd pour milk or other kind of liquids on top of them both. So that would be, in the case of a linga. With statues, you might also provide offerings around this. So you would walk into this kind of essentially a cella area. So a cella is kind of the main area where you would see the image of the deity, or at least where the altar would be, and where the offerings would be placed. So, and even today, in some cases, you will see statues of the Buddha with offerings all around it inside some of these towers. What they did change here, though, is that they kind of created a little hole in the ground, so that it would lead to this secret Khmer warrior temple trial thing, which isn't really a thing in real life. Okay, there were Khmer warriors, of course, and this was a Khmer outpost, so there, to some extent, that makes sense to have Khmer warriors all the way out here in Thailand at the time before the rise of the Sukhothai kingdom, and kind of pushing the Khmer back. But in real life, wouldn't be a Khmer warrior temple per se. But in the fictional universe, it kind of, in a sense, does make sense there. Now, that isn't the end of it. Even if the actual tunnel itself here doesn't exist, there are staircases that go down at Sukhothai, but not at this temple. At another place called Wat Si Sawai, there is a kind of, I did find a photo of a back stairway that kind of goes downwards, and it looks quite a lot like the underground staircase that we see here. And so I believe that's maybe one of the inspirations for it. And now in this underground area, we can actually see that they've tried to basically extend the three towers downwards into the ground, so each one of the prasats has a representation in this underground space, a continuation of the central prasat, one on the left, one on the right, each kind of going in different directions. Maybe one as an entrance, one as an exit. And in the center here you have this collapsed area, which I believe is where Aran, the Thai archaeologist that we meet, is trapped behind. And flanking this is actually these are guardian statues. In the fictional universe, I believe they're probably trying to use that to represent the giants, and as yaks in real life, these are more generally in the kind of Indic world. They're known as Dvarapala, so they're door guardians literally, and they can be different beings, and one of which could be the yak or the yaksha. And so here you can see depicted the Dvarapala, the guardian statues, with a kind of club. And so, yeah, let's go down into the Khmer warrior temple space and see what else we can find. And here, okay, so I was just looking for the Naga statue that we saw, and this is the foreshadowing in the game for the giant water snake that we end up fighting in many ways. And Indy gets the shivers about, or the jeebie-heebies, as Gino would say, about the idea of half human, half snake beings. And so, well, they're actually not bad. They're not bad beings in the actual religion, in actual Hinduism. They're not necessarily bad entities in Hindu religion, but also in both Thai and Cambodian histories and kind of religious narratives. And here's the Naga statue, looking very fierce, much more intense than the Naga statue that I have. The picture of the Naga statue I have found that comes from Wat Sa Si. So these statues are actually often found at Khmer temples, particularly if you go to Angkor, and so the center of the Khmer Empire. A lot of these Naga statues would be used as balustrades. So on bridges, for example, you might have the kind of the rails on the side that would lead up to these giant Naga flanking them. So and again, these are religious. This is religious architecture. These aren't malevolent spirits so much as they are kind of guardian spirits of sorts as well. Though they're different stories. So they're different stories, and they also have the Naga have the mortal enemies with another figure known as Garuda, which I might not go into that story. Maybe I'll go into that story for another time. But yeah, but even the founding of the Sukhothai kingdom, the Frau Ruang that I mentioned, the first king, founder of the Sukhothai kingdom, he is actually, according to one of the kind of mythical tales of his origin, he is actually half Naga and half human. So his mother was a Naga woman. So yeah, Naga could not in this form. His mother transformed into human form and met the king to be's father, and fell in love with her. And that's actually a common theme also found in Cambodia with the Khmer king. They also have a similar origin stories with the Naga kind of ancestry, but also the Khmer ruler would be, I guess, in a sense, obligated to visit one of the temples, at the top of which he would have a kind of Naga woman consort. Also, the king of the Nagas in Hindu religion, Vasuki, himself is involved, gives himself his entire snake self as essentially a rope to wrap around the ocean of milk in order to, what do you call it? In order to churn it and seek the elixir of immortality. So Vishnu instigated this, and the two different beings, the Asuras and the Devas, got together and pulled the Sea of Milk in order to seek that. And other beings, such as Apsaras, the Cow of Plenty, the Sacred Trees, Crescent Moon, a bunch of other things, and also the elixir of immortality came from that. And in Angkor architecture over in Cambodia, part of the reason why these are on balustrades is if one of the most famous famous gateways into Angkor have these divas and these asuras holding onto Vasuki, essentially holding onto this giant snake. So some of those balustrades are also referring back to this mythology. I'll talk more about this when I move on to Tomb Raider Underworld, because they do recreate some of these balustrades and this story of turning of the ocean of milk. In this underground area, we also see these complex network of pipes that we use for some of the puzzles. And yeah, in at Sukhothai and at other sites in Thailand and Cambodia, irrigation was a major thing in order to, again, create those reservoirs, create some of those moats. But not quite in this this specific system that we see here. But it is inspired by actual kind of irrigation technology from the region. Okay, and on some of the doors and entrances that we find in this underground fictional version of Wat Sa Sawai, there are these snake-like beings that are on the doors, and they are not necessarily Naga. They might actually be Makara, so there's some conflation of both imagery. And based on the body, technically it should be a Naga, but there is another significant being known as the Makara that are found at a lot of Hindu temples. A lot of Hindu temples in India, in Thailand, in Cambodia, all have these often in the corners of buildings. And they've been compared to gargoyles. They are, in the sense that they often serve similar functions as well in terms of redirecting flow of water at times too, but also in terms of their use as kind of guardian figures at the edge of buildings. And so Makara are actually, they look like this. They have this distinct, kind of upward feature, and but at the same time in Thailand sometimes they are conflated as there are other representations of Naga that are sometimes presented in a similar form. So in the fictional world of Indiana Jones, they're more or less presenting it as that water snake that we see, I assume. So, and then finally for Wat Si Sawai, we have this hidden Shiva statue. After we save Aran, he runs straight towards this underground area near the beginning of this level. And he goes in here and he sees this amazing, gigantic statue of Shiva. I have not found an exact analog to this Shiva, and it doesn't quite look like a Hindu statue of any of the deities from Sukhothai, so it's not necessarily Sukhothai style. It actually, at first glance, at least to me, it doesn't. It's a very different figure, but given the complexity of it, it likely owes its origin to something real. But it's pretty amazing. It also has one of those ancient relics at the base of it, which kind of makes it seem like like another linga. And yeah, and in terms of Aran, I would say I really wish we had more of this character. I mean, he's a really cool kind of side character that we only got to see for a little bit. Same with, I think Great Circle did a great job with a lot of its side characters, like Annika Lund at the explosion site is also has quite the backstory. I hope this isn't the last time we see of these characters. And I think, yeah, so that's about it for Wat Si Sawai. And we'll move on to very similar sounding Wat Sa Si. Okay, so we finally find ourselves Wat Sa Si, and it's a pretty basic temple in terms of how it's modeled. Especially in the game, there's not that much to do here. You're actually going off to the side to another kind of made-up temple structure where you have that frog poison side quest. But interestingly, the actual temple itself is modeled, but you're not really doing anything there. So that it's kind of funny that they chose to do that, but at least they modeled it, you know. And so where I'm standing is actually a little different. So you're entering from the east again here, where I'm standing at least, but where I am is roughly where the ordination hall actually is. So whereas in some of the other temples that we saw, the ordination hall was all the way on the west side of the main stupa. In this case, it's actually on the east side. And then moving from the ordination hall, this entire temple is in a giant artificial reservoir, artificial kind of pond. And so, which makes it a really cool site. So all this water that you see here is actually supposed to be here, more or less. And in real life, you'd have a bridge going from here to this next section, which is the assembly hall. And the assembly hall is fairly small, and it has a Buddha at the back, and leads to this giant, large bell-shaped stupa as well. And this is actually believed to house the ashes of one of the kings of Sukhothai. Li Tai, who reigned from 1347 to 1368-74, and so it was likely built to house his ashes. And and in terms of that, around it there should be more water, but it's sort of they basically walled it off at the back here. And there are also a few more things that aren't shown here. There should be things like boundary stones, and including one that apparently is a boundary stone shaped in the form of a lotus petal, which is pretty cool. That's about in terms of the real modeled sites at Sukhothai. There's still the explosion site that's not based off of anything real as far as I'm aware of, though there are a few features worth looking at there. They've actually used and I'll talk a little bit about more of that in separately. Right, and that's about it for today. I'll see you in part 2, where I'll cover the hidden pyramid area as well as the gate, and maybe speculate about the boss's camp and explosion site, which are not exactly actual sites, but all three have influences from different parts of Sukhothai as well. But for now, please like and subscribe if you would like to see the next part, and please review Michelson chapters 4 and 5 for next time. And I'll be in my office if you'd like to leave a comment. Alright, see you then.